This is, I think, an extremely interesting example of where you can read two levels at one time. You're taking advantage of the spatial relationships, and you should be able to traverse. You're, in a sense, in an architectural construct, but you don't have the constraints of having to believe a physical building. And so I think there's an enormous, it's a little bit like designing an exhibition, but without the constraints of the physical difficulties. You don't have to build it in the same sense. So you can both use the abstract conceptual issues as well as the physical cues that people are accustomed to. And I think it's just a wide open research field. We can rotate around this information. You can zoom into depth and multiple layers. The capability of this kind of environment releases you from the rigors and the sequential aspects of branching, and I think it offers an incredibly powerful way of going through this vast amount of information.
The use of CAD software and 3D digital effects has become more and more prevalent across most creative industries. In particular with film, CGI has become an extremely popular tool ever since films like the original 1982 Tron showed how it could be used, which, despite not being as grand or detailed as modern digital effects, on release was undeniably groundbreaking, especially with the fully digitally made light cycle scene, which offered viewers of the time a glimpse into the unlimited potential of these technologies. Now, 4 decades later, where we live in that future, where CGI is such a common tool to create scenes or entire films digitally, we are now being given a new promise with films like 2024's critically acclaimed Flow, that shows how accessible these tools have become, with it being made entirely in Blender, giving us a glimpse into what sort of great things can be created with free, open source, more user-friendly software like Blender. Even in terms of video games, this accessibility is celebrated too, with Blender themselves creating Blender Studio to highlight games made using Blender, such as the recent short game Dog Walk from earlier this year, made using a collaboration of Blender and other software Godot, testing the creative pipeline between the two. In fact, CAD softwares have even been integrated into education, with many creative university and college modules featuring lessons on their preferred software, or even entire courses dedicated to 3D, like the University of Michigan, which has a short course that aims to teach students how they can use Blender and Unity for things like games, film, or architecture. Personally, I've recently been using Blender in the majority of my work, as I have had a rapidly growing fascination with it. Now, I have dabbled in Blender before. This is the first time I've used it to this extent. However, this spark of fascination did not necessarily initially start with Blender, as I had previously used another modeling software back in college, that being 3ds Max. I used this to create 2 asset packs, one being medieval and the other sci-fi, along with example levels to display how the assets could be used, which I remember was an immensely rewarding experience. Though despite this initial spark, I would not revisit it until much later, partially due to the obscene cost of 3ds Max, but also the intimidation of transferring what I knew over to Blender. In fact, it wasn't until recently, at the end of my second year of university, where I was thinking of what to do for this self-initiated project, and I decided to look back and remember how much I enjoyed the process of making those assets. And I decided to relight that flame and finally dive into Blender. With this, I was able to put together a digital, playable experience which I modelled various strange artifacts for, along with a complimentary pamphlet, with some brief origins for the weird and wonderful artifacts. Then, even more recently, I've also started experimenting more with how I can use motion within the 3D space, as well as experimenting with rendering and different ways I can do that to achieve different results. From this experience of learning the ins and outs of Blender, I've found that I am quite drawn to the software, distinctly more than other, more traditional 2D software, such as those offered by Adobe like InDesign or Illustrator or Photoshop. Though these do of course have their uses, it doesn't mean I'd fully stop using them, rather I use them in ways that complement my 3D work. They do, however, have very different experiences while being used. With 2D software, they very much so feel like a tool that, granted is incredibly useful, often can't really feel more than that for me. In contrast, when working in 3D in Blender, I find that I am able to get much more deeply immersed in the experience, as my perception between myself and the screen blurs in a way as if once fully immersed, the software becomes a sort of extension of me and my mind, rather than simply a tool that is separate from myself. Additionally, with this sense of immersion, working in Blender and getting lost in it could be compared with the experience of playing a video game. In particular, more player-creative focused games like Minecraft. This aspect of Blender definitely lends itself to someone like me who has played video games for their whole life, even making it more understandable from the point of view of starting Blender for the first time, as I already have an innate understanding of being in a digital space that neatly applies itself to working in Blender. Alongside this, another aspect of Blender that draws me in is the large, almost infinite seeming potential in what you can create. As stated by Tony Mullen in his book Mastering Blender, quote, "Experienced users often still sense that there is a great deal of potential that they have not fully tapped into," close quote. There will always be something new to learn, no matter how long or how well you use it, which I really find quite exciting. As well, especially with it being a digital software, the constraints you normally have when working on a 3D project in real life obviously do not apply in the digital space, allowing, again, unlimited creative freedom as long as you are willing to learn. With that being said, I look forward to finding new ways in the future to integrate working with Blender into being a graphic designer, and how that can make my work be distinctly mine while expanding my knowledge of it along the way. In a wider sense too, I hope that the trend of things like Flow pushing Blender into becoming more of an industry standard continues, and it becomes more accessible so more people can use Blender for anything and everything they want to create. So lastly, thank you Blender, and more importantly, those responsible for creating Blender.